Hello everyone, welcome back to PHP registration system tutorial. In this tutorial we are going to look at registration page, but before that we want to make some changes on the setup file. This is the setup file. So as you can see, we have a code that connects us to the database. We will wish to have this on a separate file, as there will be need to have this in other files. So to make it easier to include it on other files, it will be best to have it separately in another file. So let's proceed and create another file and call it dbconnection.php. So we're going to copy this code that is connecting us to the database, and we're going to have it in this page. So let's save this. Then instead of having this as a repetition, we're going to include using the include function. So include dbconnection.php. so this should include the DB connection file in our setup page. So let's save that. Let's run to see if the setup file still works. So let's click on the setup. So the setup file still works. We have a successful data connection. Then we have these messages: database created successfully, together with the tables. These messages are coming from the setup file, though the successful connection, that message is coming from DB connection. So with that, we can proceed to create the login page. You can get the startup files for the HTML on our GitHub account. So let me just proceed and get the register.html and copy this code so that we don't have to write the HTML code. So I can just copy that on the new file that we are about to create, that is register.php. Let's proceed by pasting this. This is the registration form in HTML. So we're going to have our PHP code right on top of the HTML code. The first thing we're going to do is to include the database connection file right here. So this one is going to enable us to have access to this particular file that is connecting us to the database. So we'll be also able to have access to this particular variable, the variable con, which is connecting us to the database. Before we proceed, we can come to the form. So this is the form code, and on the form we're going to include two attributes, that is method and action attribute. The method attribute specifies how data is sent, while the action attribute specifies where the data is sent. So let's specify the method. This is a post, since we are sending data to the server. Then where the data is sent to, this is where we'll specify the file, the server file, register.php. So let's proceed with the PHP code right here. So the first thing we're going to check is the super global variable request method, so that we can know which HTTP request method was used to access the page. So we will include the if statement, if. Then let's check the super global variable request method so that we can know the HTTP request method that was used. That is, we are going to check if it is post. So if this is post, so we'll begin by fetching the form data. So we'll come here and say the variable user is equal to, then we use the super global variable post. This is going to help us to fetch the data from the forms. So we're going to fetch the username. Then we're going to do the same to email. Let's close this here. Then email equal to, we can as well copy this, change this to email. Let's now include for password. So you can have it as password. Then this should be password. So we are able to fetch this through attribute name in the form inputs. So the attribute name is what we are using to fetch the form inputs. So let's proceed and select the database so that we can be able to insert data into the database. So we use con. Remember, this con variable is being fetched from the DB connection, which is connecting us to the database, and the DB connection is what we included on top of our PHP code. So DB connect, select database, select DB, then we have to include the name of the database that we want to select. In this case, it's the user database. Let's include the SQL statement that we want to run in the query. So SQL, we're going to save it on SQL variable, that is insert into the table users, and these are the table columns, and right here is where we are passing the variables that are fetching the data from the forms. These variables here is what we are passing as the values. So let's check if the query is true. We're going to include the SQL statement right here. So let's check if this is true. So if this is true, then we have to pass a message that registration was successful. But I don't think if we need to pass a message, we can just redirect the user to the login page. So let's include the header. Then let's set the location. This is going to redirect the user to the login page. So we don't have the login.php yet, though we can still include it. You can come here and include login.php. Then you can get the startup files on GitHub, that is login.html. So let's copy this and paste it on login.php. So this is going to set the HTML form for us. So let me save that, and we are going to proceed. So we'll be able to see that while we are testing, if this query is true, or if this query is run successfully, then the user will be redirected to the login page so that they can log in with the correct credentials. So if this is not true, but before that we can write the exit function. So this is going to stop the execution of the program. So if this is not true, we're going to include an else. So here we can include a message with an error. Let's include a message right there with an error. So this is getting the database error that we are getting as a result of the failed query. So we'll be able to know where the issue is. So right here we can go ahead and close the connection to the database. You can say con close. So this is going to close the connection. Then Let's see if there is something we left. I think we've left where we'll be displaying this error message. So we need to include an alert section where we will be displaying that error message. So we are going to include that right on top of our form, right on top of the form, so we can include our error message right here. So we are just checking if the message variable is empty, then will not echo any message. But if it's not empty, it means that we have a message. So we will be displaying the message right here. So let's save this. Once we've saved, let's go and run our project folder. So this is our parent directory. So let me just click on the register.php. So as you can see, the connection is successful and we have our form displayed. So we're going to register a user. Then let's give a password and an email. I can say johnspol@example.com. So let me click on register. So as you can see, it has redirected us to the login page because we don't have an error. So let's head to localhost, then php-myadmin. So under php-myadmin, we can see our user database right here. Then let's check on the users. So as you can see, we have a user with the name user Jones. Okay, we have the password is not set. Let's check what the issue is. The variable we used here for password is different. So let's use pass instead of password. Then we also need, for security purposes, passwords needs to be hashed. So let's hash this password. So we're going to apply the password hash function right here. So let's save this. I'm going to register another user. So let's go back to the project folder, then register.php. Let's register another user, Emmy. Then password, then the email, emmy@example.com. So let's register this. Then let's refresh the php-myadmin. So as you can see right now, we have the user Emmy. The password is inputted, is reflecting, and it is hashed. So we are not able to tell which password Emmy had inserted as the password. So this is a successful execution from the register.php. So we are going to embark on the login.php and include the functionality. So first we're going to work on this link. When the user clicks this, it should be redirected to the register.php. Then we're going to work on the login button so that if this is clicked, it can redirect the user to the dashboard if the login credentials are correct. So let's head to the login.php. So on register, we can include register.php. So if we save this, head to login.php, then we refresh and click on register link, it should redirect us to the register.php. So right now we are going to add functionality that is going to fetch this data from the login form and compare it with the data that we have of a specific user in the database. If the two matches, then the user will be redirected to the dashboard. So let's proceed. So right on top of the HTML code, we will include our PHP, and we'll first start by including the connection to the database. Then we'll use the session start. This is going to help us access the session data, especially the login details, once a user is logged in. So let's first include the method and the action in our form. So this is also method post, and action will be login.php. Then we'll come right on top and include an if statement to check the superglobal variable request method to check if it's equal to post. So if the request method is equal to post, then we'll fetch the user form data. So we can use what we had in the register.php, except that we are not going to hash the password at this point. So we only need to fetch the password as it is from the forms. Then we are only going to fetch the username and the password. So let's now connect to the DB and select the database. Select DB. So we want to use the database user database. Okay, then we include an SQL statement that is going to select the username that is matching the user in the form that we just fetched. So let's write an SQL statement. So this SQL statement is going to fetch all columns from users, and it's going to check if the username is equal to the username that we have fetched from the login form. Then we can save the result as a query on the result variable. So con, then we query the SQL. So first we're going to check if this query returns rows greater than 0. If it returns rows greater than 0, it means that we have a user, and we'll proceed to check the password if there is a match on the password. But if the rows are less than 0, but if the rows are not within what we are checking in the if statement, then it will mean that no user is found. So let's begin by checking if the results will give us rows greater than 0. So if result numRows is greater than 0, then we'll proceed by also checking the password. Else, if that is not the case, then we'll have a message that no user is found. Message equal to no user found. While if the result is greater than 0, then let's get the rows fetched and saved in this variable. So row, we use fetch as source to fetch the data, and they'll be stored in the variable rows, so we can access the data from this particular variable row. So first we are going to verify the password. If password, we are going to use the password verify function. So we'll pass the variable pass right here, and another thing that we will pass is what the password that we are comparing with, that is from the database. So raw password. So we are going to compare these two passwords, the pass variable that is from whatever we fetched from the forms, and the raw password that is from what we fetched from the database. So if this is met, we'll redirect the user to the dashboard. But if not, then we'll include an else statement right here and say else. It should give us a message that invalid password. So that's the message we should be getting. So if there is a match on the password, then we'll redirect the user to the dashboard. Then we can also include the session right here to save the session username. You remember we had started a session right here on top. So we want to save the session data that we can use as long as the user is logged in. So this is one of them. You'll see how we use this. So username. So you can say that is equal to the variable user. Then we can exit this. So exit is going to stop the execution of the program. But before we proceed, we are going to include the file dashboard.php. So let's save this. Then let's include the file dashboard.php. We can get the startup HTML files from GitHub. So let's get it right here. We copy this. Let's paste it here. So this is the dashboard. Save. Let's save this. So we need to include where we'll have the error message displayed. So that can be done above the form, just as what we did with register.php. So let's just copy this from register.php and paste it right above, the login form. So let's save this. So we can proceed with the testing. So I'm going to enter a wrong password. So you can see we have an invalid password. And if I enter a wrong username that doesn't exist, let's say Paul, then a wrong password, of course, since the user doesn't exist, we can't have a correct password. Remember, we are first checking if the user exists before we check the password. So that means that if the user doesn't exist, the execution stops from there. So you can see no user found. So let me enter a correct user information. This should redirect us to the dashboard. So hooray! So we are in the dashboard. So on the dashboard, you can see we have product listing right here, which we'll look at it later on into details to have the functionality of CRUD, create, update, and delete. But right here, we'll need to implement the logout button. Right now, it's not functional. If we click on it, nothing happens. So we need to implement this so that it can close all the session and redirect us to the login page. So let's implement that by creating the logout.php. So on the logout.php, start the session using the session start function. Then we use the session unset to unset all the session variables. Remember, we had set the session variable username right here. We have set one of the variables. So if we have the session unset, if we execute this, then it's going to unset all those variables that we might have set. Then finally we are going to apply the session destroy, which is going to destroy the session as the name suggests. Then once these 3 executions are done, then we can redirect the user to login.php. So location login.php. So let's close this, save. On the dashboard, let's go to the logout button. So on the href, we can direct this to logout.php. So let's save this file, save. So once that is saved, let's go back and refresh this. If we click on logout, it should redirect us to the login page. So that was a success. So right now we've completed the login and the registration forms together with the dashboard. So we are able to register a user, and the user is able to log in and log out from the dashboard. So see you into the next tutorial, where we will focus on the CRUD operations.